Good morning, everybody. My name is Mike McNerney. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Resilience and a board member at VetsinTech. I'm also an Air Force veteran. It's my pleasure today to welcome one of our keynote speakers, Michelle Flournoy. Michelle is the co-founder and managing partner of WestExec Advisors and the former co-founder and CEO of the Center for New American Security, where she currently also serves on the board. Michelle has also served in numerous leadership positions in the Department of Defense, including as the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. In the course of our 30-minute conversation today, we're going to cover a variety of veterans-related issues and we'll end with an additional 10-15 minutes of audience Q&A. So with that, why don't we dive on in? Michelle, welcome to the program. My first question, VetsinTech, as I think many people know, focuses a lot on education and employment, which are incredibly important for our returning vets and for veterans in general. One area that I think is often overlooked, though, is the area of entrepreneurship. And as someone who has started several businesses and nonprofits, I'm wondering if you think veterans should also be considering careers as entrepreneurs. And if so, what can we do to encourage them to build the companies of tomorrow?
Well, it's great to be with you. Thanks so much for inviting me to join you. I actually do think entrepreneurship is a great area to invest in for our veterans. If they're anything like me, there have been times in my life where I sort of looked around at the jobs that were on offer, the positions I could go into in a given organization, and I thought, there's got to be something better out there, and I think I can create it. And if you have, it's not for everybody because you have to have a pretty high risk tolerance and you have to be able to convince people to believe in your idea. Like when I started CNAS, now tell me again, why would Washington want another think tank? Really? I mean, huh? And you have to have tolerance for lots of people telling you you're crazy, don't do it, it's not going to work. But if you have a vision and you have a passion for that vision, and you're excited about creating something from whole cloth, handpicking the people, creating the culture, having that leadership opportunity, and you believe you can convince others to take the journey with you, I think an entrepreneurial endeavor, whether it's starting a nonprofit, whether it's starting a business, can be a great option. I mean, for me, starting CNAS, starting WestExec Advisors, those have been two of my peak professional experiences. So I think it's a great area to invest in skills building, or at least giving people the opportunity to explore that as an option.
That's terrific. One quick follow-up on that, if you don't mind. Would you say that there are any specific skills that veterans in particular could bring to the table as entrepreneurs, whether it's flexibility or stubbornness or any of these traits that might make a good entrepreneur that veterans may possess?
Stubbornness is good. Determination, setting yourself on, I've got a mission, I've got a goal, and I'm not going to stop till I get there. That's very important. But seriously, leadership, people who know how to bring together teams of very diverse experience and perspective and skills and get them to operate as a team towards a common mission. That's a huge part of making successful startups work. And then I think also, that mission focus, really seeing a need, seeing a problem, and going after solving it. And the more it's not just a matter of intellect, but actually something you feel passionate about, the more likely you're going to be successful.
That's great. Switching topics a little bit to the tech community more broadly, right? VetsinTech has a great community of employers and partners that are within the tech community. In addition to being a manager and a leader, you're also a thought leader. And I know that you've thought a lot about defense policy. I know you've thought a lot about tech innovation and tech policy as well. Do you agree that the United States is potentially losing its edge in technology? And if so, is there a role for veterans to play in maintaining that advantage for us in our country and our society and our economy?
Yeah, I do think we are really at an inflection point where we have the emergence of some serious geopolitical competitors like a rising China. We are also in a period of profound technological disruption. So the technologies and capabilities that served us well in the past are not going to be adequate to ensure that we can deter and deal with challenges from China and Russia and others in the future. And so leveraging our tech innovation, leveraging our tech talent in this country is going to be key both to our economic competitiveness, but also to our national security going forward. And I think for veterans coming out of the service where you feel such a profound sense of mission and higher purpose, one of the ways that you can continue to serve in national security is to bridge that gap between the Department of Defense or the intelligence community or the national security community broadly, that key customer, and the tech ecosystem that's out there in the Silicon Valleys of the world and in Austin, Texas, and all of the various places. And there are not many people who can translate between those two worlds. And so I think it's really important, frankly, for our national security to have people with the veterans background and experience try to bridge that gap. Go understand the tech community, become part of that community, and help bring that community to the national security space. It's not just rewarding at an individual level. It's a necessity, I think, for the country.
So I think you said something there that was powerful, that struck a chord with me in particular. I mentioned I was an Air Force guy, and I ended up going into cybersecurity because I thought it could be lucrative, but also because there was a very strong mission component to it, right? To help make people and companies more secure. And many of my co-founders and executives are also veterans, which is great. I'm wondering if, in addition to cybersecurity, which I think we know well and focus on a lot, are there other areas where you think veterans could focus on, be it AI, robotics, etc., that might not just be interesting, but also worthwhile from a mission perspective?
Absolutely. I think you just named AI in several different applications. One is AI, we're going to be we are awash in data. And the more we connect different sensors and architectures and networks, the more awash in data we're going to be. We're going to need AI to help us separate the wheat from the chaff, and to get the key information and insights to the right decision maker at the right moment. And the speed with which we can do that, and if we can outpace our competitor or adversary, that's going to be a very decisive factor. So that's a whole area, the sort of AI in support of faster, better decision making on the battlefield or in a campaign or in national security more broadly. That's one thing. The second is in the autonomous systems and really human machine teaming. The AI that's going to enable unmanned systems to operate together, but also to be directed by a human being that's out of harm's way. And here, some of the really wonderful entrepreneurs we're seeing, one of the companies we work with at WestExec is Shield AI. And here you have two brothers, one who was a former SEAL and one who's an MIT, engineer, teaming up to say, how can we use autonomy to help the warfighter, in the near term? And they did the analysis. Most dangerous position, of anybody on a raid, first guy through the door, because you don't know what's on the other side of the door oftentimes. So they've created these AI-enabled quadcopters that can basically surveil and clear a house faster than a human team can, and can relay that information back to the human team before they have to go in, so they don't go in blind. So that's the kind of applications that's here now. That's happening now, and that's only going to grow when we figure out how to direct swarms of airborne UAVs or underwater UAVs or what have you. And that's going to give us some edge back in an environment where we may well be at a quantitative disadvantage in terms of platforms. But if we can leverage those kinds of unmanned systems and team them, we can regain some of that advantage and more. I think this is a very exciting space, and the tech world needs people with the operational experience to really understand the potential use cases and what would work or not work for an operator. It's a great way to continue serving in the national security space.
So we've talked a little bit about veterans and the tech community at the micro level. I wonder if we can really briefly zoom out at the macro level. I think a lot of people recognize that while the Department of Defense had a very significant role in helping build Silicon Valley into what it is, that relationship does seem to have frayed in the last years or even decades. And I think there's a couple famous examples of where that relationship has become tense. I'm wondering if you have some thoughts on what the defense community can do to help bridge that gap, as well as what the tech community can do to have those two sides kind of have that closer, more productive relationship that they used to have once again.
Yeah, no, I think there was definitely a period of true breach after the whole Snowden situation. But, today I don't think that's the problem. I see so many tech companies who actually want to contribute to national security. DoD has gotten a lot better through things like DIUX, the Defense Innovation Unit, that to scouting technology, finding those innovative companies. They've gotten a lot better at funding prototypes and demonstrations and experiments. Where we're still, I think most of the problem is on the DoD side, where we haven't really reoriented any part of the acquisition system to work well with companies that use an agile development process to develop their technology products. It's one thing to, oversee the acquisition of a aircraft carrier or a fighter jet, and with all of the focus being on keeping it on cost and schedules and this sort of deductive, sort of cascading set of milestones that have to be met, with lots of years spent defining requirements to a T. It's a totally different thing to develop software or an AI application or an AI-enabled system where it's an agile process. It's iteration. It's constant feedback between the operator and the product manager and the technologist and the engineers, and it has to keep going like that. That requires a very different acquisition approach that the DoD is just starting to wrestle with. They've written some good guidance, but they have not yet trained and incented the acquisition workforce or any portion of it to really become the Green Berets of, agile acquisition. So there's that. And then tech talent. I mean, it's not just, bringing more tech talent into the department. We have to create more tech savvy customers, more tech savvy, contract managers, more tech savvy budgeteers. And we could better use the tech talent that's already in the military if we manage them differently, if we created some tech-related career paths for people to go all the way to general and flag officer as technologists within the force.
Yeah, that'd be incredible. I certainly recall it's generally the operators that tend to get those higher-ranking jobs. So that would be
yes.
I think a pretty great change. With that, I'd actually like to shift gears back and focus on the veterans community more specifically once again. And I believe we're going to hear from Secretary McDonough as well later today. Okay. But I'd love to get your perspective as a former Department of Defense leader. How well do you think we're doing in training and equipping and preparing our veterans for a transition from military service to civilian life more generally, as well as in some of these critical jobs specifically? And are there some areas you think we could be focusing more on?
I think, it's certainly there's been progress made. I don't want to deny that, but I think we still have a long way to go. A lot of our veterans have developed incredible skills that should be marketable skills when they leave the service, but we haven't necessarily given them the chance to get the sort of civilian certifications that would validate that they have those skills. And so I would love to see the military, whether it's in the normal course of business or as part of a transition program, make sure that as people are coming out with military skills that have civilian counterpart, civilian certifications, that we help people get those. So we don't just like throw them out and say, well, you can go work on this certification, but that part of the transition process includes some help in translating. Well, if you have this skill set in the military in your MOS, you probably could pass this civilian certification that would be really meaningful to a future employer with maybe, a weekend's worth of study or practice or what have you. So I think we have to do a better job of that. And I think we also have to do a better job of helping veterans translate from militaries into sort of civilian tech speak for a resume. I mean, I got used to reading military resumes because I had military people working for me and I had to write their evaluations. But, for most people, reading a military bio or a military CV, it's like speaking a foreign language, and a lot is missed. And so you've got to help people do that translation. And that's something that we could do a much better job helping our veterans with for sure.
Okay, great. That's helpful. Thank you. Along a similar line, VetsinTech takes a special pride in its diversity and the diversity of its community. A majority of the veterans that go through the training and employment programs do come from diverse backgrounds. And I wanted to ask you, as a leader in both government and business, one of the key areas that we focus on, and I think is often overlooked, are women veterans and military spouses and women in general. Is there any advice that you could give to women in particular on how to pursue leadership roles such as like the ones that you have?
Well, I would say don't be deterred by the fact that you may not see someone who looks like you ahead of you. Sometimes you'll need to be the trailblazer. But also, I would say, do look for other women as sources of support. I remember my first tour in the Pentagon. I decided to host a women's leader lunch. I found all 8 of the women leaders, and we had lunch in the cafeteria at one table. And everybody was staring like, oh my God, they're all sitting together. What are they talking about? The fast forward 30 years, you'd probably fill a dining room with the number of women leaders in the Pentagon. So there's progress there, at least on the civilian side, some on the military side as well. So I think not being daunted by being the only woman at the table, finding role models and mentors, even if they're not women, but seeking out those mentors who can really help you. That is absolutely key. I always say, choose the boss, not the job. Find that person who's going to develop you, invest in you, grow you, give you opportunities. That's more important than any job description that you could come up with. And do create. Find your support. Go laterally to find other sources of support to get you through the times when it feels very lonely or very difficult. But I think if you focus on persistence and being excellent in your work, eventually people will figure out what you have to offer, and you'll make room so that others can follow.
That's great advice. Thank you very much. One last question. I think we have time. And since you're here, I would like to ask you a broader policy question.
Sure.
What do you think, now we're in a new administration, what do you think are the largest and most challenging national security threats and opportunities facing the United States today? And how would you go about, preparing for those?
I'm going to give you two answers because I think we have to deal with both. One is we need to broaden our notion of national security to recognize that there are transnational threats like pandemics. This is not going to be the last one. So pandemic prevention. I think we've got to think about that much more seriously than we have in the past. Climate change. It's going to have security implications. It's going to have all kinds of implications for us. And I think that is another example. But in the more traditional nation state category, I do think we really are at an inflection point. We are at a point where we have a rising China. that is going to compete economically. It's going to compete politically, militarily, ideologically with us. And it's a nuclear power, as are we. We need to figure out how to deter a China that we don't understand very well and that doesn't understand us very well. So the risks of miscalculation as they rise and as we sort of find our places relative to one another and we manage this competition, that the risk of miscalculation is very, very high. If you were to go to Beijing and turn on the news in your hotel room, lots of the coverage would be about evidence of U.S. decline. Look at the January 6th attacks. Look at, rioting in the streets on the margins of, various protests. Look at the George Floyd killing and the racial divisions. Look at our political polarization. The Chinese narrative is this is it. The U.S. is done. Now is our chance. It's our moment to restore the Middle Kingdom and to be the global power. If I don't believe any of that's true in the sense that, yes, we have problems, but one of the things we know about the United States of America is that we are an incredibly resilient nation. We are like the phoenix that keeps rising from the ashes of, whether it's world wars or depressions or what have you. And so we're going to figure out COVID and we're going to beat it. We're going to figure out how to come out of this economic situation, and we're going to grow and we're going to be strong and we're going to figure out how to keep our edge technologically. But unless it's very dangerous if the Chinese don't see that and they don't believe it. And so I think we're going to have to manage the risk of miscalculation for a period of time here that has very, very high stakes. I also think to the point about tech is if we simply just rest on our laurels, particularly as a military, and just proceed with the things that have made us the best military in the world, and we just extend those into the future without change, that's not going to be enough because China's going to come at us and Russia as well, asymmetrically, and with challenges that we need new technologies and new capabilities to be able to meet those and to keep, have confidence in our ability to deter those challenges in the future. It's not about throwing away the legacy force. It's about adapting that force with these new technologies being integrated so that we can once again be survivable, operate at range, keep our lethality, and ultimately be able to impose the kind of costs that will deter a great power who's thinking about aggression.
Great. Well, that was a very thoughtful and thought-provoking answer. I should expect nothing less. Appreciate that. That ends the direct Q&A part of this discussion. We do have a few more minutes for some audience questions that I'd like to ask now. Some of these you may have answered shades of this already, so you have an opportunity to expand or provide more context or pass or whatever. But I'll go ahead and dive on in. Actually, I think this is a great question, a question that I'm kind of curious about as well. The first is, how did you start your career? And what was the arc that led you from the beginning to where you are today?
Okay. So I'm going to date myself here. I came out of grad school in the mid-'80s at the height of the nuclear saber rattling of the Cold War between Reagan and Gorbachev. And so the issue of the day when I came of age was the nuclear arms race. And how are we going to manage this dimension of conflict without losing our survival, basically? I mean, if we weren't going to deal with the nuclear arms race, we wouldn't be around to deal with anything else. Kind of how I think a lot of younger people feel about climate change today. So I started cutting my teeth as a nuclear bean counter and arms control tracker in a think tank in Washington. And that really, becoming an expert on all things nuclear, really defined the first decade of my career. And then it wasn't until the early 90s when I had a chance to join the Clinton administration. And again, this was that moment where I learned that choose the boss, not the job. I had an offer to go do things nuclear in the Pentagon. And then I had an offer to work with a legendary mentor of young people, someone named Dr. Ted Warner. And someone told me, choose the boss, not the job, even though the job was reorganizing or re-standing up, establishing a strategy office in the Pentagon. And defense strategy is, miles wide, and I had been miles deep in something very narrow. So that was a very daunting transition. But I went with the advice, and it was one of the most important and best decisions I ever made in my career, because by the end of 5.5, 6 years in the administration, I elevated several levels, and I had established a whole new area of expertise and position and so forth. So tremendous opportunity. I came back out of that to the think tank world, worked at various think tanks, and then had the crazy idea in 2007, along with my co-founder, Kurt Campbell, that Washington did need another think tank, and there was a better recipe, one that was not afraid to go to the pain, go to the most controversial issues if they were the most consequential, to take a nonpartisan perspective, and to put as much focus on developing the people as we were on developing policy, really grow the next generation of national security practitioners. So that was the founding of CNAS. Had a chance to go back into the Obama administration as the undersecretary, one of the best jobs in Washington. That's another conversation. And then when I finished my second stint in government, came out and really felt that rather than going back to the think tank world, what I saw that was one of the most broken parts of government was the business enterprise. The fact that we were still operating in the Pentagon based on what Bob McNamara brought from the Ford Motor Company in the 1950s. That was sort of the best practices within the Pentagon. So I joined Boston Consulting Group to really kind of get my MBA by the case method, and to really see what does good look like at scale in business today, and how much of that best practice can be brought into government. And then from there, I went back to CNAS to kind of do another tour of trying to grow the organization. And then decided after 2016, the election went the way it was. I decided, hey, I'm ready to start something new and start. Washington needs a new strategic advisory firm that leverages the best and brightest of a new generation with very recent government experience. And so we started West Exec Advisors. So it's been, a tri-sectoral career, I guess, nonprofit, government, and business. But I have found that working across those lines has actually given me a lot of insight, and enabled me to translate across those walls, if you will.
I see a couple themes in that response. Obviously, there's kind of the general national security theme that permeates everything, but a recurring theme of being mentored and then mentoring, right? And another theme of identifying processes and improving upon them. And you seem to kind of go and have these different, kind of alternating experiences along those themes in national security, which I think is really interesting. And for those who don't know, you are well regarded as a mentor yourself in the defense community. So I think that shines through in your career and in your comments there, which I think is terrific.
If I could just add, I think a lot of policy people miss the value of investing in human capital. I mean, you can write policy and then it gets overturned by the next administration. It's very ephemeral, having policy impact. But when you invest in people, it's enduring. It lasts a lifetime, and it's incredibly rewarding. And so I just would encourage folks to make that more a part of your, the range of things that you do, because it's a real contribution to the field, cultivating that talent pipeline, but it's also incredibly rewarding, and nobody can take it away from you.
So you might update the old, what's the old saying, that amateurs study strategy and experts study logistics to true experts study right?
That's right. Exactly.
Great. Okay, I think we have time for one more audience question. And there actually are two, and they're kind of related, and you've addressed them a little bit already, but I'll give you a chance to add a little bit more context. They're both around technology and working with tech companies. The first is, what are some of the key technologies that are important for national security? I wonder if maybe we can adjust that a little bit and say, what are some of the key technologies that you think maybe we are at risk, particularly in falling behind on? And then how do you, from your position at West Exec and other places, how do you interact with tech companies, and what are some lessons learned there? I know you mentioned Shield AI, which is a great company, but do you have any other examples there that would be interesting?
Yeah. So in terms of the technologies themselves, I do think we have to be pretty clear-eyed that, 5 years ago, China came up with their national technology strategy, and they are going after it with investment in a sort of coherent way, which only an authoritarian state can do. We are now just waking up to the fact that we need a technology investment strategy, that we need to have a strategy for things like AI, for things like 5G, for semiconductors, for quantum computing, for directed energy applications, for hypersonics, for biotech, the application of biotech in national security. So we are waking up to this fact. I think one of the most consequential reports that's out there is the National Security Commission on AI. It's a huge 750-page tome, but please at least skim it because the recommendations are really, really important, not only for us to keep our AI advantage, but also to build this sort of digital 21st century infrastructure for so much, for keeping competitive in so many other areas as well. So in terms of the work I've done with tech companies, I mean, it's multifaceted. One is at West Exec, we've tried to find kind of best-in-class companies that really answer an urgent need or an important future need for a national security customer, whether it's the military or the intelligence community or what have you. And we don't do any lobbying or business development or anything like that. But what we do is we try to coach the company, help them get smart on how to navigate government as a customer, how to navigate the national security space. How do you adapt? How do you develop your use cases? How does your pitch deck change? Who are the key stakeholders? The notion that it's not, there's one thing to know who's going to have, ultimately use the capability. It's another thing to figure out who has the money to pay for it, who's going to have the contracting vehicle to get to it, all these other stakeholders that you really have to understand if you're going to do business successfully with the government. So we try to be kind of a coach to help them understand that navigation. And then we're also trying to do some work with regard to talent flows. How do you get more tech talent to spend some time in public service? How do you get people who are in public service to build their tech acumen and knowledge by doing some tours in the tech sector? And how do you take what's basically some soda straws, linking the two, and kind of make it a superhighway where people are flowing back and forth, and you're really developing that cadre? So those are the ways that we've been engaging on this issue.
Okay. Great, thank you. So I believe that's all the time we have today. I'd like to thank the very honorable Michelle Flournoy for spending her time with us today, as well as to all of you for listening into this conversation, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much. Great to see you.
Yeah.